Hey team, and welcome to another video in our Astrological Magical Elections video series. Today I'm joined by my co-host Bubbles, or well, she was there. Maybe she'll be back later. But today we're going to talk about our magical electional opportunities that are going to be available for us between the Virgo New Moon on September 6th and the Pisces Full Moon on November 20th. Unfortunately, we don't have a whole lot really going on this 2 weeks, and so we're kind of going to do a planetary check-in to talk about why that is. Mostly, it has to do with the continued retrograde motion of Jupiter and Saturn. If you remember, we really can't use retrograde planets very heavily, really within any sort of role in astrological magic without having to suffer, really, some of those retrograde type of meanings or manifestations, usually having to do with like walking backwards, undoing, changing our mind about things. They can be useful in very specific magical contexts, but generally, since we're trying to move forward and develop a thing, we tend to want to avoid planets that are retrograde. So that means that we can't have the moon applying to Saturn or Jupiter. We typically wouldn't want the moon to apply to Saturn anyway. And we also cannot have Jupiter or Saturn ruled signs on the ascendant, so Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces are out. Added onto that, we also have the issue of Mars moving closer and closer to the Sun, or I guess really the Sun moving closer and closer to Mars, if we want it to be technically accurate, to where we're starting to get kind of within the realm of Mars being combust, which is another major debility that we do not want to have involved in our elections outside of very specific contexts again. So not only do we have the whole Jupiter-Saturn thing to worry about, but also now Mars as a potential candidate enters, which makes it to where we can no longer really use Aries or Scorpio ascendants after a certain date, and throughout this time period we get kind of close to it. So that's sort of another thing that we're being wary of. So in this video, it's actually kind of interesting. There are 6 elections to cover: 1 for the North American continent, 2 for Western Europe and North Africa, and 3 for the Australian continent. And all 3 places have different elections, so it's like 6 different elections for 6 different things. So that's always fun when it happens. We get to kind of talk about a little bit more things. I don't get to consolidate, one election or talismanic type into the different locations. Everybody is a little bit unique. No overlap this time. So there will be some FOMO, I guess we'll say, for all the locations potentially, as there may be an election that you want for another location that isn't going to happen in your own. But let's go ahead and get started. We're actually going to start with Australia and handle their 3 elections first, do Western Europe and their 2 second, and then close out with North America and their single at the end. But our first electional opportunity for Australia is going to be on September 9th at around 7:30 in the morning. And this is going to be an opportunity for a 15th Lunar Mansion talisman. The 15th Lunar Mansion is one that is primarily about like networking, connecting with friends. There's a little bit of like a wish granting part of it as well. And here, our friendships aren't like the deep or emotional kind of friendships or relationships that we might make or discover in like the 24th or in the 6th mansion even. They're much more like business oriented. So they're more, I think of this mansion as more like the networking and kind of like the social climbing more of a mansion, as well as of course having like helpful business significations as well. So this is a mansion that you would turn to if you are like a small business owner or even a big business owner and are looking to get your name out more, looking to connect with clients or customers or with other people or like with other businesses in the same or related fields. It could be really useful, like the collaboration talisman we might call this. So any kind of really great, especially if you're in like entertainment or anything like that, this could be a great talisman to help kind of bolster up some of those relationships. In our election here, we have the moon placed on the ascendant in the 15th Lunar Mansion, and here she's applying a conjunction to Mercury in Libra. And here, it's, Mercury in Libra is a good connection when it comes to those kind of business type of relationships. It's not Venus, with Venus, though, you have more of those intimate, close friendships. It's not Jupiter, where you might have those more like supporting benefactor type relationships. Mercury is very much like relationships between equals and kind of like a shared intellectualism, shared goals kind of a thing. So Mercury, I think, works very well in 15th Lunar Mansions, and of course Mercury being a planet that is associated with like trade and commerce can help bring home a lot of the significations of what this mansion is going to try to do for you. There's a really good overlap between the planet and the mansion that we're trying to work with in this example. But having talked about Venus, or mentioned Venus, we do need to kind of talk about her. Because she is the ruler of the first house with Libra rising, Venus becomes the ruler of the first house and is a pivotally important planet. She's not afflicted by Mars. She's really far from this square from Saturn to have to worry about. And she's kind of conjoined the part of fortune, which is kind of nice. This might be a little bit wide for many people to consider. I probably would too. But they're right there kind of on top of each other. So we have a benefic planet that's in charge and is unafflicted as the ruler of the first house. So all in all, just a pretty solid election. Nothing really to worry about here. Our second electional opportunity for the Australian continent is going to be just for the next day, about half an hour later, on September 10th at around 8:07 in the morning is what this chart is set for. And this is going to be an opportunity for a 16th Lunar Mansion talisman, just one mansion later. And the 16th is more the 16th and 15th mansion are kind of similar, but the 16th mansion is more focused on like the wealth and business success, or like maybe like a business, a financially successful business, as opposed to a business that may have a good reputation. Like those can be different, right? So now the 16th mansion is more focused on like financial health, financial solvency, and like the actual commerce aspect of business, buying and selling, trading goods and services. That's more what the 16th mansion is about, and about being successful and growing those kinds of things. Australia really kind of lucked out in these charts. That's why they have the most, because for most other locations in the world, while the moon is applying to Venus on the ascendant, they are actually having to deal with a trine to retrograde Jupiter instead of the immediate application to Venus. So Australia gets lucky because while their moon is 25 degrees Libra and is past the 24 degrees Aquarius trine, it gets moved right to Venus, whereas other places in the world have the moon like at 23 Libra or earlier and have to deal with this retrograde Jupiter nonsense that ruins most of their elections. The moon's application here, the moon on the ascendant with the application to the application of Venus, really reinforces a lot of those benefic and growing energies. Venus is, Venus is not typically associated with like the accumulation of wealth and like a liquid state. Venus is usually more associated with like the luxuries that wealth can afford you, or like the symbolic luxuries that we associate with wealth. Jewelry, fine clothing, fine furniture, things like that. So it's usually more Jupiter or Mercury it's usually more Jupiter who is more associated with like the liquid asset of wealth, and Mercury more associated with like coinage and currency. So those are kind of some distinctions of wealth in astrology. But Venus is a benefic planet, and she is very well placed in this chart. So while we would not normally associate Venus with like the accumulation of wealth or like the success of business that seeks to transact, that seeks to be transactional and profitable, Venus can definitely bring those benefic good energies to that kind of enterprise to support it and stabilize it. So don't look down, I guess, on Venus in these kind of situations, because she can definitely do the job that needs to be done in this kind of situation. And one thing to note about this election is that the moon is actually very, very close to the end of the mansion. The 16th lunar mansion, ends at 25 degrees Libra and 42 minutes. And as you can see, the moon is at 25 degrees Libra and 16 minutes. So about an hour-ish after this chart is done, after this chart is passed, I guess, the moon will be moved out of that mansion, which should be more than enough time to complete anything that you're wanting to do for this talisman. But just be aware that the moon is kind of cutting it close to the end of this mansion. Our final election for the Australian continent is going to be for September 15th at 1947. And this is going to be an election for a Vega fixed star talisman. And Vega is a really neat fixed star, even though I feel like I say that about every fixed star. That's just kind of how I describe them. Oh, they're all neat. I just think they're neat. And Vega is a star that is primarily associated with like spiritual protection. Its main thing is, not just spiritual, there's also like a physical protection element to it. Vega's main job is to protect a person's spirit from various spiritual assailants, whether those would be, curses or negative energies or demons or angry spirits, or even things like nightmares to help protect one from nightmares and experiences of sleep paralysis. Vega can definitely take care of sort of whatever that thing is that you characterize negative spiritual energy as. That's what Vega is here to protect for. Vega is also very useful as a tool for exorcism and cleansing. So I definitely recommend Vega to a lot of people for almost any It's Vega is a really good star to keep as a tool, which is a little bit different from how I normally think about fixed star talismans, but Vega is one that is very clearly meant as like a spiritual aid, a little bit kind of like Procyon, but like different kind of flavors of that. But here we see stars being used more as like ritual aids or tools, as opposed to like spiritual guides or as things that can make things manifest, like a wish attainment or goal attainment entities. Like entities you petition. Here, they're more like allies who work towards a very specific job. And Vega, it just does that within like spiritual protection. So if you're somebody who has had to deal with that in the past, is currently going through a spiritual struggle, somebody who is plagued often by nightmares or has had various experiences with sleep paralysis, Vega can actually be really helpful. And I definitely would recommend Vega to you in that situation. Here in our chart, we have the moon conjoined Vega coming to the conjunction of Vega, I guess we should say. On the MC, Vega is a star that is at 15 degrees of Capricorn. And at the same time, the moon is applying a square to Mercury in Libra, which might sound like a weird choice, but Vega is actually of the nature of Venus and Mercury. So we've got the planet, the moon should apply to a planet that is of the nature of that star. We have that done here. But we do have an Aries rising, and I kind of mentioned before that Aries risings were a little bit like sketchy or something to be kind of looking out for, because as you can see down here, we've got Mars and the Sun coming close to one another. Here we have the Mars about 9 degrees separated from the Sun, and combustion starts at around 7.5. So we're getting kind of close, and this would be like my caveat to this talisman. Having the moon in the right place, applying to the right planet is really good, but the ruler of the first house is in kind of like a dicey situation. But that might represent more your situation. That might be more of a symbolic representation of your situation. So it might not be so bad, but we are getting kind of close to the end of it. My kind of thing is, I don't typically really enjoy utilizing planets that are at the end, or yes, hi Bubbles, I told you she'd be back. At the very end of their synodic cycles, because there's this association with like old age, with like decrepitude, with weakness. It's a planet that is dying, that is approaching its deathbed, that is at a very advanced age. So there's this like a certain weakness or vulnerability associated with it that I don't normally like to encapsulate in talismanic imagery or in talismanic stuff. But there are situations where that might, not that you necessarily might be very in advanced age, even though you might be, but you might be kind of like at that end of the line kind of situation where you're just tired of whatever the problem that you're dealing with is, kind of like at the end of your rope, in which case this becomes more symbolically appropriate than it is like something that's coming to you, if that makes sense. So something to keep in mind, Australia, a neat Vega election. The ruler of the first house is not in as great as a place that we would want, but if that doesn't bother you so much, or if this Mars in Libra, kind of exhausted at the end of its cycle, is something that speaks to you, or about your situation, here you go. That's here's your thing. Here's your talisman. All right, so now we're going to move into our Western European charts, and now I'm joined by my lovely co-host Bubbles, who apparently just did not want to deal with the Australian electional opportunities. So our first electional opportunity for Western Europe and North Africa is going to be on September 11th at around 12:45 in the afternoon, and this is going to be an opportunity for an 18th Lunar Mansion talisman. The 18th Lunar Mansion is one that is primarily about healing of the body, and it is about healing of the body. It is about recovery and overcoming an illness. Usually the 18th Lunar Mansion seeks to devour the illness as much as possible. It can be very useful for those who are about to undergo surgery as well. So that means that the 18th Lunar Mansion is not very good about preventative medicine. So if you're not already sick, the 18th Lunar Mansion isn't actually very helpful for you and could actually be a little bit dangerous. So keep that in mind. I guess it could also be possible to make this talisman and then just sort of make it dormant for when you do need it. That's a possibility or an option to pursue if you're at all interested in that. So for those of you who are ill or have a loved one who are ill, this could be a great sort of complementary approach to healing. And in this chart, we have the moon here in the 18th Lunar Mansion on the ascendant. And at this time, she is applying the sextile to the sun as sort of the font of vital power, of life energy. I always really enjoy having sun connections in health and healing talismans, just because the sun is so intimately associated with healing and the life force that it's really hard to overlook that power, and it's really easy to notice it missing. So aside from that, the ruler of the first house in this chart is, of course, Mars here. And again, remember those Mars-ruled houses are a little bit iffy in our elections because of this close proximity of the Sun with Saturn. Here, they're about 11 degrees apart, so they're further than they were in like the last Australian chart that we covered. But that sort of that weakness, that lethargy, that lack of energy, that kind of at the end of the rope sort of situations, is something that we're still, like, those are still symbolically relevant. So just kind of something to keep in mind with this one. The moon-sun aspect is very strong and very powerful, very ideal for this kind of talisman. But the ruler of the first house being near to the sun is not necessarily ideal. We're not in the combust phase where I would throw this chart out without question, but we're getting a little bit close to it. So that would be kind of like our imperfection in this chart. So something to consider if you choose to move forward with this one. So our second and final electional opportunity for Western Europe, North African continent is going to be for September 17th at around 23:20, so just a bit before midnight. And this is going to be an opportunity for a 25th Lunar Mansion. And the 25th Lunar Mansion is one that is primarily focused on like plant life, like in agriculture. I mean, the image is of a man planting trees. Like that one's really hard to parse out the meaning, right? But you can also kind of interpret it to be useful for growth in general. Like that's what plants do. They continue to grow and to provide for the environment around them. So the 25th Lunar Mansion is one that can be very useful, of course, for gardening, for farming, for plants in general, for empowering medicinal plants is a good utilization for it, one that I really like. But if you're not really involved in plant life, like if plant life isn't something that you're involved in, then this might not be the talisman for you. But it could also be that you can kind of re-strategize the talisman to be about growth and personal development in general, like the growth of oneself as if you were the tree, we'll say. So kind of just a different way to look at it. One of my favorite utilizations for this talisman is I usually make a stack of talismans for it whenever there's election, and then I burn the talismans and use the ashes as mixed into like a fertilizer or potting soil for whatever I plant from. So it's going to be a great way to kind of save some of them for later, since I know that this is getting to be a little bit close to the end of summer, maybe kind of past our planting seasons. But just some ideas on how to use this one. So in our election chart here, we have the moon in the 25th Lunar Mansion conjoined the midheaven, kind of sandwiched a little bit between this Saturn and this Jupiter here. But instead of she is applying, of course, eventually, to the conjunction with Jupiter, which is retrograde, which we don't want. But before that, she's going to apply this trine to Mercury, in Libra. And air signs are good signs that have to do with growth. So we're going to use that. We're going to lean into this. This would be one that we would kind of more want, like the Jupiter or the Venus, planets that are more explicitly about growth, whereas Mercury is a little bit more unsteady, we'll say. So Venus and Jupiter are a little bit better about like the constant growth. Mercury is a little bit unwieldy. And Mercury also serves as our ruler of the first house. Mercury is not afflicted by Saturn, not afflicted by Mars. So all in all, the ruler of the first house checks out. The ascendant degree is not afflicted by Saturn or Mars. The moon's not afflicted by those two planets either, having separated from Saturn about 10 degrees ago. So all in all, a pretty solid 25th Lunar Mansion chart for the gardeners out there. So moving on to our North American election chart, we only have the one and only for this 2-week period. The only one I was able to find and kind of talk myself into / stick with is going to be for September 18th at 11:49 p.m., 23:49, so just about 10 minutes before midnight. And this is going to be an example of a 27th Lunar Mansion talisman. And the 27th Lunar Mansion is kind of like an awkward one to work with because it's kind of like duplicitous. The way Warnock describes it, it's a little duplicitous in its actions. Here we're going to utilize it more for, I would like to utilize it more for healing and for the accumulation of resources, one of those two things. But it has kind of like a weird duplicitous message in its workings, which is not super unusual for a Lunar Mansion talisman. I feel like they're all kind of to make this thing and to break this thing. But the 27th Lunar Mansion has this maybe expressed a little bit more heavy-handed in some ways, at least according to like Warnock's interpretation of it, which I tend to follow. But so the 27th Lunar Mansion, we're going to use this as primarily like a healing medicinal talisman. The figure has a bowl that it holds, which I tend to interpret as more of like holding on to or creating medicines. So very similar-ish to the 18th Lunar Mansion. The 27th Lunar Mansion is one that I feel is more associated with healing somebody who's already sick, rather than working to preserve the body in health as the sort of like preventative measure that we normally see in like the 10th Lunar Mansion, who I think is a little bit unique in that specific type of healing modality. But the 27th Lunar Mansion can also be used to accumulate resources and wealth, not super unlike the 16th Lunar Mansion, but because of a lot of this like two-facedness or kind of like doubled nature aspect of the talisman, I often wonder if it's like, if it doesn't work through like taking from something else to give to the person that it's for, which I guess is not too unlike, economics and trade in general, but there's just kind of like a weird feeling associated with this talisman, which is why I don't super talk about it a lot. But this is an election for this mansion. This mansion can be used to heal and to increase and for financial gains, so definitely approach it in that manner. Here we have the moon in the 27th Lunar Mansion on the midheaven. And at this time, she's applying the trine to Venus here in Scorpio. Venus doesn't super like Scorpio. Who does? But Venus is a benefic planet who is capable of providing wealth and health. So definitely something to lean into here. The ruler of the first house is Mercury, placed here at 22 degrees Libra, not afflicted by Mars or Saturn, doing pretty well. The ascendant is also not afflicted by Mars or Saturn. And yeah, the only thing that would have been better is if Venus had been like in a better house or something. But she's going to be there in the 5th house, which isn't terrible, but just not super angular like I would normally like them to be. But that is our 27th Lunar Mansion talisman for health and wealth. And so those were all of the electional opportunities that I had to share with you guys for this 2-week period. 6 is a pretty good number of electional opportunities. I just wish they had been a little bit more evenly divided, or that we could have had some kind of overlaps or double ups in certain locations where they could share certain talismanic elections. But that was not the case this time because of sort of like the precarious dance that the moon has to do through some of the signs to avoid the immediate aspects of the immediate applying aspects, the next one's coming up, of those planets that are retrograde or getting close to the combustion of the sun. Only Australia was really able to handle that gracefully, whereas North America and Western Europe were not able to get like the good, like, the moon conjoined Spica, right, would have been like the moon Venus Spica conjunction would have been cool. Let's look at that just like as an example of what happened. No, I'm going the wrong way. So the moon Spica conjunction, like this would have been a nice chart with the moon applying to Spica at 24 degrees Libra and then to Venus. That would have been cool, except for, but bam, you'll get Jupiter, you'll get the application to the trine of Jupiter, who's retrograde and kind of ruins this, in my opinion. And that's for, like, that ended up being for both Western Europe and North America. Australia did not have a time where the moon was applying to Spica with Spica on the midheaven or the ascendant, so they got to kind of miss it. But like this is just like an example of like the Australian charts moons through Libra and Aquarius were able to like really hit stick the dismount, whereas like North America and Western Europe kind of like fell on their face because these aspects with Saturn or Jupiter always kind of like intervened and messed up otherwise what would otherwise have been really promising electional opportunities. But as the sun moves into Libra, I forgot who the air sign after Virgo was. As the sun moves into Libra, Jupiter and Saturn will start to turn direct again, which will be less stress off of the cosmos and our electional crafting hobbies. So hopefully, as that happens, our elections will look nicer and cleaner, and we'll have more to talk about. So I will see all of you again, and take care until our Pisces full moon.